Time, it is the silent architect of civilizations, the unseen force that shapes memory, destiny, and meaning. For most of history, the West has claimed ownership over its definition: linear, relentless, always marching forward. But what if time was not a straight path, but a vast, breathing circle? What if the past was not behind us, but all around us? This is the revolutionary vision of one man, John Mbiti, the philosopher who dared to redefine time itself. Born in 1931 in Kenya, Mbiti grew up in a world where the old ways still whispered beneath the surface of colonial rule. His people, the Akamba, understood time differently, not as a countdown, but as a living tapestry. The past was not gone, the ancestors were not silent, and the future, it did not yet exist. Young John Mbiti was a child of two worlds. By day, he studied in missionary schools, absorbing the rigid structures of Western thought. But by night, he listened to the elders, to the stories, to the rhythms of a philosophy that had thrived for millennia before the first colonizer ever set foot on African soil. In these stories, time was not a line, but a cycle. The past was Sasa, the near, the immediate, the realm of living memory. The future, Zamani, the great beyond, the place where all things eventually returned. But here's what stunned Mbiti. In this worldview, the future did not dictate life. The present and the past did. Imagine living in a universe where your grandfather's wisdom was as real as the ground beneath your feet, where the future was not a distant promise, but a shadow yet to form. This was the Africa Mbiti knew, and it was slipping away. Mbiti's journey was just beginning. He would soon leave Kenya, study in Europe, and confront the great intellectual giants of the West. But he carried with him a question, one that would shake the foundations of philosophy itself. What if the Western world had misunderstood time all along? And so, the battle of ideas began. Oxford, 1969. A lone African scholar sits in the heart of Western academia, penning words that would send shockwaves through the world of philosophy. John Mbiti was no longer just a student of theology. He was about to become a revolutionary. The West had long believed its concepts of time, religion, and existence were universal. But Mbiti knew better, and in his seminal work, African Religions and Philosophy, he delivered a message that would force the academic world to listen. Africa was not behind. It was different. Mbiti's argument was radical in its simplicity. While Western philosophy saw time as a straight line, past, present, future, African tradition understood it as two vast interwoven realms, Sasa and Zamani. Sasa, the now, the living moment, where ancestors still speak and the past breathes. Zamani, the great beyond, where all things return, where the future does not yet exist. To the West, this was heresy. To Mbiti, it was truth. The backlash was immediate. European scholars scoffed. How could time not march forward? How could the future be irrelevant? But Mbiti stood firm. For Africans, he said, time is not a river to be crossed. It is a sea in which we swim. He was unshakable because he knew something they didn't. This wasn't just about time. It was about power. Who gets to define reality? Whose knowledge is considered civilized? Mbiti's work struck at the very core of colonial arrogance. And then, something extraordinary happened. Across the continent, young thinkers seized upon Mbiti's ideas. If time was not linear, then neither was progress. If the past was alive, then so was their heritage. The chains of colonial thought began to crack. But Mbiti's fight was far from over, because now he faced an even greater challenge, convincing the world that African philosophy was not folklore, but a profound, sophisticated understanding of existence itself. And the battle was only beginning. 1971, the world was changing. Colonial empires crumbled, new nations rose, and at the center of it all, a quiet storm raged, not of politics, but of ideas. John Mbiti was crossing the ocean again, but this time, he was no longer a student. He was a threat. They called it a debate. In truth, it was war. Mbiti stood before the most respected minds of the West, armed only with his words and the weight of centuries of African thought. And what he said next would shatter their worldview forever. Mbiti's critics had one weapon: dismissal. African philosophy, they sneered, a contradiction in terms. But Mbiti had spent years studying their own traditions. Augustine, Aquinas, Kant. He knew their logic better than they did, and now he turned it against them. Mr. Mbiti, surely you don't expect us to believe that time is different for Africans. Time is a universal constant. Then tell me, Professor, when your people speak of the good old days, are they dead or or do they live in your actions, your values, your very identity? For the first time, the West faced an uncomfortable truth. Their universal concepts were not universal at all. They were cultural, and if time could be redefined, what else could be? But Mbiti wasn't finished, because the most explosive idea wasn't about time, it was about God. Western theology insisted God was separate from creation, but Mbiti revealed the African truth. The divine was in the ancestors, the land, the very fabric of daily life. This wasn't primitive. It was a deeper, more immersive spirituality than the West had ever imagined. The impact was electric. Across Africa, a new generation realized they didn't need to beg for a seat at Europe's table. They had their own, and it was ancient, and it was glorious. But revolutions have costs, and Mbiti was about to pay his. The backlash would be merciless. 1990. The world had changed, empires had fallen, new voices had risen, and John Mbiti, once the radical, the firebrand, now found himself caught between two fires. To the West, he remained too African. To some Africans, he had become too Western. They called him a traitor, a sellout, because in his later years, Mbiti dared say the unthinkable, that African tradition needed Christianity, that the old and new could merge. To purists on both sides, this was heresy. This was the cruel twist of fate. The man who had shattered Western arrogance now faced attacks from his own people because Mbiti refused the easy path. He would not reject Africa's past, nor would he reject the future. You quote the Bible more than the ancestors. Whose side are you on? I'm on the side of truth, and truth does not fear questions. This was Mbiti's greatest lesson. That identity is not a cage. That one could honor the ancestors without freezing time itself. But in an age of absolutes, nuance became his exile. In his final years, the invitations dried up. The debates moved on. The man who had forced the world to rethink time was left behind by it. But time, real time, has a way of correcting itself. Today, new generations discover Mbiti anew, not as a relic, but as a visionary. Because in our fractured world, his message burns brighter than ever, that no culture owns truth, that the past is not dead, that the future is not yet written. The West now teaches Mbiti in its universities. Africa reclaims him as its own. The circle completes. Sasa and Zamani embrace at last. John Mbiti is gone, but like the ancestors he honored, he is not gone. Time is not a line, it is a sea, and we are all still swimming. John Mbiti.